Today, the Hebrew language and the state of Israel seem inseparable. But what's crazy is that for millennia, spoken Hebrew was an all but dead language. Sure, the Bible, prayers, and the religious texts were written and read in Hebrew, but nobody spoke it in daily life. So, how did an almost extinct language become the mother tongue of Baljuri in the span of only a few decades? Something that had never happened in the history of language. And what role did Eliezer Ben-Yahuda play in the rebirth of Hebrew? Let's go back. In the Bible, the Jews, otherwise known as Hebrews, spoke ancient, well more biblical version of Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew remained the native tongue of Jews for over 1,000 years. But Hebrew as a spoken language began to die out around the year 70. Thus the year the Romans destroyed the second Jewish temple in Jerusalem and exiled a vast number of Jewish people from Israel. And Hebrew as a spoken language died around 65 years later in 135, after the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt, when Roman Emperor Hadrian expelled, enslaved, or killed most of Israel's remaining Jews, the final native Hebrew speakers. So that should have been the end of Hebrew, right? Well, no, Hebrew as a spoken language died. But the few Jews left in Israel continued using Hebrew in the study of Torah. And this is key. They only use it as a written literary language. According to Louis Glenner in his book, The Study of Hebrew, reading Hebrew became a sort of spiritual resistance by Jews against the Roman oppressors. By the turn of the 2nd century, Aramaic had become the commonly used language of the Middle East. But Hebrew as a written language for Torah study still persisted. The revival of Hebrew began in the late 19th and early 20th centuries with the Zionist movement. But modern Hebrew still faced some major hurdles. One of them was Yiddish. Yiddish wasn't just the spoken language of most European Jews, it was their mother tongue, their way of life. The Hebrew pioneers themselves didn't start off speaking Hebrew. Moshe Lilienblum, a pre-Herzl Zionist leader, actually said Hebrew's time was up. Herzl himself even thought German was the natural choice for Zionism. Lack of Zionist leaders' interest reviving Hebrew seemed quite unlikely. And then there's Eliezer Ben-Yahuda, born in what is now Belarus in 1859. He believed the future of the Jews required both their own land and their own language. And Hebrew was the way to unite Jews across the globe. With the visionary approach, he packed his bags and moved to Palestine. Adopting the biblical sounding name Eliezer Ben-Yahuda, he and his wife established the world's first strictly speaking Hebrew household in almost 2,000 years, and soon produced the world's first native Hebrew speaker in almost 2,000 years. The experiment got off to a rough start. By the age of 4, Ben-Zion still wasn't talking, and Ben-Yahuda was so obsessed with proving that Hebrew could exist as a modern daily language. He actually prevented Ben-Zion from playing with other kids to avoid any corruption of his Hebrew. As the kid's first word finally came, Abba, Daddy, Ben-Yahuda wrote in his diary that there was now no room for doubt that Hebrew could become the spoken language of a community. But how do you make this change happen? Ben-Yahuda believed the key was to use it as a language of instructions in school. Hebrew wouldn't just be a subject studied, it would be the language used to teach all the other subjects, like math and history. The first all-Hebrew elementary school was founded in 1989, and within 10 years, the number of all Hebrew schools grew to 20, with 2,500 students. In 1890, Ben-Yahuda founded the Bad Lashon, or the Language Council, which still exists to this day as the Academy of the Hebrew Language. The council published bulletins and dictionaries coining thousands of words you don't find in Torah, like doll, ice cream, and bicycle. Not everything he invented caught on, but Ben-Yahuda took it upon himself to keep the language growing. Although Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism, initially preferred German to Hebrew as the language for Israel. As he said, who knows enough Hebrew to buy a train ticket? He was not interested after his first encounter with Ben-Yahuda either, As he stated after meeting him, "Today I met the young fanatic who tried to convince me that what our movement needs is to adopt Hebrew as our national language. But he soon reversed his position, even embracing Hebrew while embarrassed that he could not speak it." After Ben-Yahuda's death, the Zionist Congress officially declared Hebrew the language of Zionism. The language spread through schools and homes in Israel and developed through trial and error. But Eliezer Ben-Yahuda had achieved his goal. Shortly before Ben-Yahuda died in 1922, Britain officially recognized Hebrew as the language of Palestine's Jewish inhabitants. 26 years later, Israel became an official Hebrew-speaking state. While Ben-Yahuda invented around 150 words, his son Ben-Zion and others came up with thousands more. In fact, the first Hebrew dictionary was not completed until 1959, 11 years after Israel was founded. And just think about the fields of medicine, science, and law. Entire dictionaries needed to be written to cover new concepts that has not even existed when the Bible was written. Men like Dr. Aaron Meir Mazia took on the task of advising Ben-Yahuda during his life and continued his work after his death. By the time of Israel's establishment, over 90% of Israeli kids under 15 were already fluent in Hebrew. With refugees pouring in from all over the world at that time, the need for a common language was front and center. Hebrew was still battling Yiddish as a popular language, but many in Israel's booming immigrant population considered Yiddish a language of exile and the reminder of things they would rather forget. Ben-Gurion went so far as suppressing Yiddish from being used in any public role, using a well-organized political system to force Hebrew use through its comprehensive services to the immigrant masses. A comprehensive Hebrew dictionary, integration of Hebrew in schools, political figures, Hebraized their names, showcased the commitment to a Hebraized national identity. Advocacy for linguistic purity, alongside the encouragement of Hebrew in daily conversations, and the linguistic shift in media and literature, collectively Hebraized the entire environment, and thus the Hebrew language finally born.